Welcome, everybody, to the First Name Basis podcast. This is where we chat with industry leaders about innovation and what's happening in the times of today in digital. I'm your host, Sheetal Jaitly, CEO of Tribal Scale, and today with me, I got Jeremiah Zinn. I'm going to refer to him as Jay-Z because he's not only in Brooklyn, he kind of looks like Jay-Z. I'm totally playing. But I got Jeremiah with me, who is the Chief Product Officer over at Freshly. Jeremiah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Jay-Z, you may not know this about you, but like from the first time I first met you, you've always been just really open and helping me out in my career. And so I really asked you to come on this podcast because I think you got a ton of insights. You always look at things with a different type of perspective, one that I'm not used to hearing all the time. And our 15-minute quick chats turn into an hour and a half. So we'll try to condense a lot of that magic into this podcast today. Well, why don't we start there? When I first met you, you were at Viacom, and you started building a digital practice there, and like new to a media company that was very linear in its thinking and how it operates. Obviously, things have changed now. But what was it like at Viacom, and how you actually started creating this practice over there?
Even, backing up a little bit, talking about career and life, like I figured out very early on what type of person I was and the downsides and the good sides of who I was. And one thing I realized about myself really early on is that I get bored quickly when I'm not learning new things. And, that could be thought of as a con, right? Like it's a challenge when you're like not into managing something in phase 3, 4, 5, 6. But really what I tried to do was like lean into it as a pro and say, literally like, how can I keep myself interested, think about 2-year horizons for every job, and think about like what new things I can learn at every new step of the way. So coming to Viacom, I was super excited. One, because in the past, what I wanted to learn was mobile, because I'd lived abroad and I'd seen people, this sounds like old school, but I'd seen people see their first like web page on a mobile phone, send their email on mobile phone. And I was like, literally, it was like a religious experience. It was like epiphany where I'm like, this is the way the world's going to go. And obviously like the world has gone that way. So I learned about mobile. And then once I had all of these mobile skills pretty early in the business, this is like 2004, 2005. Then I was like, how can I bring that to great content? And I'd never worked at a media company before. But I was like, the type of content that Viacom has just works so well in a mobile phone, right? Like this wasn't a network that was doing, 2-hour documentaries. Like these were like small bite-sized pieces that worked well. So I was really excited, to flex on Nickelodeon, on Comedy Central, on MTV.
MTV, I mean, how much it's changed, but like back then, I was just glued. I was in my 20s. I mean, all I did was watch MTV. If it wasn't music videos, it was TRL, Real World, just so much awesome content that at that age, that's all you consumed.
Yeah. So I was, it was something I had never done before, even though I knew mobile really well. Like I'd never worked in the media business. And I still think about like that first week when I came into a Comedy Central meeting and it was like, oh, there's Jon Stewart, like that kind of like, wow, this is part of culture. This is this impacts, millions and millions of people. And the mobile experience that I could build could really have impact as well. So it was like this perfect mix of like this mobile platform that was gaining steam, and I knew it was the future with great content.
Now you gotta clarify platform there. I mean, we're talking about old school devices. This is pre-iPhone for our listeners, pre-iPhone, pre-Android. I mean, the world has changed a lot, but like you had the foresight to say, hey, we could be communicating with our consumers in a more effective way, leveraging mobile.
Yeah, and I think this is also kind of maybe in the career advice column, which is like a lot of people were holding back on mobile because they're like, it's so messy, You have to learn, there's a thing called J2ME, which was like, a lighter version of Java. There's a thing called WAP, which means a very different thing now.
It's not the same WAP, right?
Wireless access protocol, right? For displaying web pages. And so I think a lot of people were like, I'll like jump into that mobile thing when it works itself out. And because I was wired this way, because I was really interested in learning and really interested in like engaging with new things, like that risk of trying something that didn't end up working out was far de minimis compared to the excitement that I had around mobile. And what it allowed me to do was like get in early, really learn a lot. Like, I felt like I was one of the few product people in New York who really understood mobile end to end. And that's kind of driven me on my career. It's the same as like getting into health now or crypto or all of these things that are changing right now. Like the food business we'll talk about later is being disrupted right at this moment.
For sure.
And that's been really fun to be there early on and be one of the people who's kind of setting the standards and setting where it will go.
Well, one of the things I think we talk a lot about on this podcast is like this idea of entrepreneurship, because you don't sit still. From the years I've known you, you don't sit still. You're like, hey, I'm creating something out of nothing. And once you think things are getting easier, and they probably are at a certain point because you've done so much, you jump. You're like, I can't do this anymore. I got to go. Yeah. And which is really fascinating to me, because there came a time when, you were doing some awesome stuff at Viacom. We ended up working together, and I remember you saying, hey, I'm leaving. And I was like, why would you leave right now? Like, all the eyeballs are going on the products that you're building, and they're moving away from the traditional linear media channels. And so what makes you want to switch? What gives you that tick to say, hey, I'm going to go try something new? Yeah. Because it's definitely, and it's probably not even the cash component, because
no, it was definitely not.
I think we got to call that out too, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think like I've never been very obsessed with cash. I've never been very obsessed with title or sort of status. And I've always been obsessed with learning. And so making the decisions have been pretty easy to leave, because it's been when I stopped learning. Like I found myself, at the end of my time at Viacom, I learned everything that there was to know about the TV business and the digital media business.
Right.
I mean, obviously there was probably people who knew more than me, but I'd learned enough for me. I was running a 400-person team. I'd created a great culture and really learned to manage at scale. And I was like kind of projected forward and said, over the next 3 years, like how much more would I learn? And really, I couldn't put my finger on many things. And so at that point, I really was thinking about the digital experiences and thinking about myself as a product manager. And I was saying, the experience I really understand is media, and the way media works is they try and drive these huge audiences. They try and drive these huge clouds of advertising dollars and push them together. And they don't worry about like if money falls on the floor or if people falls on the floor. They're trying to think of the VMAs, like create a big event where there's a lot of dollars and a lot of eyeballs, and just hope that breaks through the public like consciousness.
Sure.
What I had never done was, one, and we'll talk about this later, like worked in e-commerce, where from a product management perspective, like every user is important, and you want to follow them across the funnel, because they're not giving you a little attention that equates to, pennies from advertisers. They're dropping real dollars at the end of a conversion funnel or monthly as part of subscription. I also, and this is where I moved after Viacom, I never worked on an app that was truly social. And, the average experience at like a Viacom brand could be, an example with Comedy Central is you see a Daily Show post on, a blog, you watch that video, maybe you click through and you go to Comedy Central, and then you don't come back for a month. And that's
we tried to do some interesting stuff with Tosh. I remember there was the user-generated content stuff that your legal team was like, "Are you guys crazy?"
So like I think we made good strides in that experience, but you have to think about like what the business model of the company is. And it's usually not about like long session times, multiple visits. It's about getting big audiences in the door. And so that was when I got really excited about this really crazy dating app called Lulu, because when they showed me the numbers, they had huge acquisition numbers. They launched in Brazil and they got 5 million downloads and were down for 2 weeks. But also, when you think about a dating app, not only are people visiting it regularly, right? Because you're interested in, people viewing your profile, are they messaging you? So session times are 30 to 40 times per day, but you're joining this app to change your life, right? You're there to find a partner, and you're going to join the app without a partner, and you're going to probably stop using the app when you have one.
Sure.
And that was an experience as a product manager I'd never worked on before. So I was super excited about doing something that was so drastically different from what I'd done at
That's a
Viacom.
180 from what you were doing, right? And this is like the big shocker for me as we, go for dinners and stuff. I'm like, what are you thinking? Like you just threw away everything you worked 5, 10 years to learn.
Yeah. And I got emails from people like, congrats on this change in your life. This is the dumbest thing you've ever done. Like, please you come back. And, and I'll be direct. Like, some people really felt like it was a step down. And for me, it was just like, look, I want to learn new things, and I can't learn those here. I also really wanted to be hands-on again and like be back in the startup space because, I'd done my time at a big company. I wasn't really running away from something, but I was running towards something.
Sure.
I also saw
I think that's a great way to put it, just to say that you weren't like, that was one of the things you opened my eyes to. It's like, you're never running away from something. Those skills and those problems I solved there, it's time for me to take all that learning and try to adapt it into something else. I'm going towards a new trajectory in my career. I'm not leaving what I learned.
Yeah, and what I learned by making that change, which I like, if I had planned this, it would have been genius. But what I learned was, I was going to have trouble getting traction in the startup world until I could show that I could work in a room of 10 people and do what I needed to do. And I wasn't going to be that big media exec that's like, okay, where's my team that's going to do all the work? And I'm just in the direction. Like, I was excited about, like flexing my SQL skills and looking at data,
writing user stories yourself,
writing user stories, hopping into the Jira queue. Yeah. And so what I didn't realize though, is that every startup wants to be a big company at some point. And so Jeremiah as a media executive became Jeremiah as an executive who was open to working early on, getting their hands dirty, but also could support that growth from Series A to Series C or D when the team goes from 20 people in a room to a 2,000 person company. And so having that almost dual citizenship in working at a company at scale, but also really being comfortable in a small environment, really presented the story to most startup CEOs where they were like, oh, this is a guy I could hire in Series A, and he can work with me all the way through Series D because he's managed a team of 400 people. He could just do that again here.
And it sounds easy. I know, like before I did it myself, it sounded like, yeah, I can manage a team of 200-300. It's not a problem. But when you grow that big, that fast, oh my God, doesn't shit break? Yeah. Right? Like you start breaking things pretty fast, and not having that experience around the table to give you those breadcrumbs on where you should be putting in front of you, not behind you. It's tough. I mean, we grew too big too fast and, epically failed, which is great. Yeah. Because now we've learned and we're rebuilding the right way. Yeah. But that's absolutely like a versatile skill that like, hey, not only am I going to go deep in the product world, but I'm actually going to help your leadership team out to actually scale this the right way so you don't make a bunch of mistakes.
Yeah. And I think like part of people's resistance to kind of engaging with this world is a resistance to change. Mm-hmm. And I think if you have a resistance to change, you're just swimming upstream, because it's not just about, you may find a company that doesn't change so much, but that company is probably going to have a hard time surviving, just as you mentioned, like with your company, in a rapidly changing world. Like if we look at the last year and all of the changes that happen weekly, if you aren't, comfortable in change and can't engage with change and can't adapt to it, you're not going to be able to work in this world. So in many cases, like you're not going to be able to find a company that you're happy at. And so part of it is like being okay with the uncomfortable feeling of change, being okay of having to pivot, being okay with like change can be growing and it can be shrinking. Mm-hmm. And just not resisting that, because, I think maybe for our parents, there was a world where you could start a GE when you're 20 and get the gold
And retire, yeah.
when you're 55, but
Yeah.
that isn't the way that we live. And when I look at like my 10-year-old son, like that's not the way he's going to live. Like he's probably going to work for 3 different apps at once. He's going to get a notification, and that notification is going to say, hey, like this is the job you have today. And then another notification for this is a job you have tomorrow. And that's just the way it is.
I think, working with the people who are much younger than me now, I love the fact when they actually break through a lot of the norms or the ideals they have in their mind of what a startup life should be, and get used to being uncomfortable. And that it doesn't sound like it should go together, but there is a thing like, there's going to be a curveball thrown at you tomorrow. You don't know what it is, but it's coming. And you're going to have to figure it out. And once we took a look at our values and looking at what our core values should be. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing that came up from everybody in our tribe after all the change and like the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows of rebuilding a company back up was resilience and being resilient and handling that.
I mean, I guess like one of the things that I'd love to ask you, sorry to turn the tables around.
Sure, go ahead.
A lot of people from the outside think working at a startup is a specific way. Like, what do you think the myths of the startup are?
I think the movie The Social Network is the myth. I think or the snacks, or you watch it and it's like, oh, I have the best idea in the world and I am going to be the next Zuckerberg. Look, I think it's great to have that ambition and go shoot for that. But the reality is it's not all snacks and ping pong tables and parties and whatever. It's actually hard work for very, very little pay. There shouldn't be any job that's beneath you. I mean, if I'm in the office, heck, I might be the last one because our cleaning person's not here taking out the garbage at the end of the night. And I don't give a shit. Like, who cares? It's a job that needs to be done. And I think that is like a preconceived thing that a lot of young people, when they come into the startup world, think, is this comfort level is going to be there, and it's definitely not.
Yeah, I think it's definitely that. I also think it's I think people have a preconceived notion because they see, a movie like the Facebook, and they think that there was an initial seed of a plan and that plan just unfolded and like that's what ends up happening. And I think it's always very hard for people to understand that sometimes you're just trying to find a rich vein to mine, and you're just mining in like rock with nothing for a long period. And then you find that vein. Some people never find that vein. And then that kind of creates a plan. But like sometimes the strategy is just like trying to find some value and continuing working that way. And I think it's always shocking, especially for people who are joining startups early in their career, that they're like, wait a second, everybody doesn't have this figured out, No, like we have a couple hypotheses, we have a couple like strong feelings about things, but we don't know.
We don't know. I also think I was chatting with a recruiter yesterday, and she mentioned to me, she's like, Sheetal, one of the things I like start asking about while I'm recruiting is like around the notion of hustle. And she's like, you wouldn't be surprised how many like people in their early 20s come to me and go, well, I'm really looking for a work-life balance. And it's like, you're in your early 20s. What work-life balance? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah. You're just starting work. Like, it's work, and the balance comes after. Now, I think there's companies like Google and a lot of other organizations that do very cool thing, the 20% time. Companies offering unlimited vacation, which I think also there's data showing that you end up working more. But, even work from home before the pandemic was like, luxury per se. I think we're all realizing this may not be the best thing ever. But like that work-life balance thing is something I think when you're at a young startup, it's just work. It is grinding. And if you're not going to go do it, you probably have a competitor of people out there who are probably going to go work harder than you. You may have a better idea. Yeah. You may have a better product you're about to build. But if the other people are grinding faster, harder than you, they're probably going to win.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of that comes from people are a little confused about like what a startup is. Like Google is not a startup. Like
Right.
Amazon is not a startup. They've done a good job of embracing startups tactics at scale, but they're just not startups. Like Google has a huge ad business that supports every new thing they do, and those new things don't live or die based on, you know, how the ad business is doing.
Sure.
You know,
Which is also pretty cool. I'll give them respect. They go out and they launch products, and they can have epic failures like Google Plus. But
yeah,
who gives a crap? They went out and they tried it. At least they tried it. They released it, and they practice what they preach. They kill it when it's not working.
yeah. I mean, they're almost doing the hardest thing, right? They're like sort of managing both sides of the brain at once, where they're and I saw this at Viacom, how challenging it is, like having that legacy business that makes a lot of money and doing new things that could threaten that legacy business and managing those both at once. It's almost easier at each end of the spectrum, where it's like you either have a legacy business and you're milking it and maintaining it, or you're like, we're doing something new, and if this fails, I fail. I got to figure out a way to make this work.
Right.
But the middle ground is hard, and that's what, you know, your earlier comment about entrepreneurship, about why that's so hard, because sometimes the things that you do, like the mobile work that I did at Viacom, could be destructive of the core legacy business, and the life of an entrepreneur is a hard one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about BarkBox and
Yeah.
like and your experience over there. One of the things I remember being in the office with all the dogs, just being like, Jeremiah, this is very different from meeting you in Times Square
Yeah.
at the Viacom office. But like, not only were you doing e-commerce there, one of the things that really surprised me was really figuring out the total cost of ownership of when you become a lifestyle brand, and how important it became for understanding your consumers, the BarkBox consumers, who wanted to actually interact with you in a more meaningful way as a company than just getting a package in the mail every month.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't take credit for that. Like the founders of BarkBox, Matt, Carly, and Henrik, really were smart in the beginning of the business, and they had product market fit on BarkBox, which is just a box of 2 toys, 2 treats, and a chew that comes to you every month. And it was almost like a new employee joke that every new employee that came in there, like 2 weeks in, would be like, I have an idea. What if we do a cat box? And you know, you could imagine how that would go. You do a cat box and a ferret box and an
a fish box, whatever.
Yeah. And Matt, Carly, and Henrik were so smart about this. They were basically like, look, we live in a world where the knowledge of how to actually sell a box, ship it every month, bill somebody for that every month, that's actually not a moat, right? Like in a world with Shopify, you know, and Recurly for subscription billing, and third-party logistics, like a lot of people can do that. Like what they recognized that what they had that was unique was an audience, right? And an audience around a lifestyle. And what they really leaned into was kind of 2 things. One was dog people sometimes felt like they were different from their other friends who weren't dog people. There was some weird aspect of being a dog people that only dog people would understand. And they really, really leaned into that. The second thing they leaned into was that basically there was a transition happening in our world, almost akin to, an example they gave was, if in the 1950s, like the premier kids brand was Gerber, which is essentially like feed your kid and keep them alive.
Right.
And after that, the premier kids brand became Disney. And that was moving from keep your kid alive to wanting them to be happy.
Right, right.
Their insight that we found through a lot of like customer interviews and qualitative research was that dogs in many cases were like the step that a lot of people took between being single, being part of a couple, getting a dog, and then having kids. So
that's a whole user journey for a pet. Yeah.
Yeah, and the user journey kind of illuminated the fact that, one, if you know, many times, like if you're not going to have kids, many times your dog is your child, so you want to show love to your dog. And then 2, when you have kids, all of a sudden your dog becomes like, you know, the low man of low status in the house. And
Sure.
so you want to have a moment where you show love to your dog. And a lot of this came out of some insights that we had that were very data driven, where we saw that our first box that got shipped had an NPS, Net Promoter Score, of about 50. The second box would have a Net Promoter Score of about 60, and the third one was 70, which is like 50 is good, 70 is amazing. And the question we asked ourselves was like, what changed over those first 3 months that all of a sudden they went from liking us to loving us? And we started talking with customers, and every customer told us the same story. They were like, I went to BarkBox, I figured I needed stuff for my dog. I hate going to the pet store, so I wanted it just like in my house. And so they get their first box, they'd open the box, they dump it into a drawer in their house, and then they dole it out to their dog over the course of the month.
Sure.
The second month, the postman would drop the box, they'd bring the box inside, and the dog would start freaking out, like know that the box was
knows the box is coming.
And they would open the box up, we would give them maybe one toy, and then they'd throw it in that same drawer. And then the third box would come, and literally the postman is just like walking up the driveway, and the dog starts freaking out. And they would sit down with their dog, they'd open the box, and they would have like 2 hours of fun with their dog. And the switch that happened over that first 3 months was, oh, this is a product that I'm just getting like toys and treats easily into my house, to, oh, BarkBox Day is this one day a month when I show love to my dog. And then when we have this awesome time, and I don't have to worry about, am I showing my dog enough love over the course of the month or scheduling that time?
Yeah.
I know it's going to happen on BarkBox Day. And
I love it.
That was like this insight,
Yeah.
Your point about a lifestyle brand, where we were like, oh, we didn't know what our heart was. Now we know what the emotional heart of our business is. And then we leaned into that all across the business, where literally in the beginning, it was just, when we send you your first box, we show you a video of like how to enjoy it with your dog. Then we start putting in the conversion funnel. Then we start advertising about, this is a product to show love to your dog.
That's so awesome. And so a couple things on this.
Yeah.
One was, people also loved user-generated content about showing how happy their dogs were and sharing that with you guys. And so you started this whole portal of like people just uploading dog videos, and you started getting other people watching other people's dog videos.
Yeah, I mean, literally it started with people love to show photos and videos of their dogs, and they would just unsolicited send them to us. And I would be like, thank you, I don't know what to do with these. And like in traditional MVP approach, like we just built a WordPress blog. We started posting them. Our consumers love the spotlight being turned on them, and love the spotlight being turned on their dog. It was just this organic thing where people started going to that site, and especially folks who were advertising. BarkBox is not too expensive, but
Sure.
For the average person, when people are making choices about car payments and health bills and food, not everybody can afford a BarkBox. So it was a great place to say, hey, if this isn't something for you, check out this site. You're part of the dog family. Like, this would be a cool place for you.
Right.
And we started just spotlighting content that we saw on the web, our users' content. We started producing our own content. We hired a bunch of comedians and started doing dog-based content, and literally built it into a 23 million unique site, in terms of a media site, of like a contender on the internet that was ad supported. It wasn't, in support of the BarkBox business. It was its own standalone business. And we're able to do that thing of having the legacy business, but starting to seed new businesses that were truly, like, we called it a full stack dog company. The idea being that, hey, it's not just about the box, it's about media and events, and really trying to create all these different experiences for the audience of people who love dogs.
Very cool. And then, all right, so we got a lot of listeners who are product managers or user experience designers, a lot of people who totally get it. Hey, we want to focus on the customer and do research around the customer. You guys did something that I remember my jaw hit the ground, and I was like, you got to be effing kidding me. You had a room with a bunch of toys, and you would just wait and see what the dogs would do with them, and you were doing dog research.
Yeah, I mean, we even actually had a shopping concept. One of the programs that I ran was called Bark Beta, and the whole idea behind it was like, let's seed fund a bunch of existing ideas. and see if those ideas had legs. Let's not try and build a business. Let's try and validate that it's even a good idea.
Yeah.
And an example of that you're referring to, the next phase of that was, at that time, a lot of e-commerce companies were trying to figure out brick and mortar, and their obvious approach was like, oh, these products we're sending in a box, let's just put them in a store.
Sure.
And I got the very challenging question of, if a dog could shop, how would a dog shop? And I was like, why are we making this hard? Let's just put all our products in the store. But we basically launched a concept which was, hacked together, but basically we had a room and dogs would come into that room, they'd schedule a play date, and they would get an RFID harness that they would put on the dog. And then all the toys in the room had RFID tags on them. And so you let your dog play in this room with other dogs. And then as your dog played with different toys, there was a leaderboard just for your dog, and it would show the toys that your dog liked the most.
Right.
And so you could watch the leaderboard, see, I don't know what that toy is called, but my dog loves it. It's at the top of the leaderboard. And then right before you're ready to go, we'd say, hey, can we put those into a cart for you and ship them to you tomorrow? And it was a really cool concept and really fun. And, I really valued my time at Bark because we would do those types of things where we wouldn't do the obvious thing. We would kind of really try and get at the heart of, like, as a product manager, like, what is our customer, a dog that can't speak? Like, how
Let's go pull insights out of a Bark.
Yeah. And solve those problems in really interesting ways. I mean, if I can bore you with one other example,
sure.
One challenge that we always had was dogs are very particular about what treats they eat. And so you can buy a $10 bag of treats. You can give one of those treats to your dog, and your dog can turn its nose at it and walk away. And you're like, I just spent $10 on this thing.
Right.
So we saw that happening with our customers, and we basically developed this thing called a treat sampler. And the whole idea behind it was, we would send you an assortment of all the treats that we had. We would give you a little placemat that you could put all of the treats on the placemat. We built an app where you could have a little candelabra, and we gave your dog a kerchief that they could put on while they were having this experience. And we created this little dog experience around sampling all of the treats and deciding which ones they liked. And then as part of that, buying that sampler, you would get a coupon for a full version of any of those treats.
Of any of those treats.
And so it was a perfect, like, example of from a product manager solving real product problems, right? Because you have this conversion problem, like, what if my dog doesn't like this? You have this sort of,
and that goes a little like, because if the dog doesn't like it, I may not even be blaming the treat. I may be blaming BarkBox, being like, this box sucks.
Yes, exactly. So it could, this one little experience that's not well informed could affect the whole brand. And then what we're losing is, and what we get on the treat sampler was, it had embedded in it a repeat purchase, because you were then going to use that coupon to get another version. And what we found was, if you found a treat that your dog loved, you were a customer for life of that treat, and you would just subscribe and save that treat. So it almost is an example of a product that solves every step of the life cycle, and it packages it. And this is, kind of kudos to Henrik Vedelin, who is the head creative there. It packaged it in this fun, silly way that you are gonna, create this tasting experience or a tasting menu for your dog.
Love it. So, like, all the product managers out there, when you're taking a look at your company, pardon my pun, I'm going to have to say, like, a cheesy dad joke, but, like, think outside of the box, right? But it's so true. I mean, we get so caught up in, like, the metrics that we think we need to solve. And what I'm listening from your stories right now is, like, think outside of there. Like, those metrics are important, but there's other ways of hitting them than just traditional ways that have been done before. You got to really look at your product and say, all right, how, in what other aspects of the user journey could I even create an opportunity for my product to become more relevant?
Yeah, and think holistically about the experience. It's not just about the digital experience. Like, for the product managers out there, like, how many of you would say, I think we should put a kerchief in the box and we should create an app that's a candelabra, right? Like, that's something that feels outside of what you could ask for. But for our customers, they're not thinking like, oh, the digital group does this and the marketing group does this.
Sure.
The packaging group does this. They're thinking about it as a holistic experience. And if you're not working on those things together, it's not going to work. Like one of the things we used to do was we would, in the box, either the paper in the box or the box itself, we would print a little like seasonal theme that you could take a picture of your dog with. So if it was like a Halloween theme, we'd put a little, a pumpkin and a little scare.
Right.
And you could cut the box open, you could take a photo and submit it to us, and we would highlight all of those like little scenes. And it was just a cheesy example of like a way to bring the physical experience with the digital experience. But customers loved it because most brands don't think that way. They don't work across the silos. The packaging people are those like packaging scientists over there that of people that you don't really know that much about and don't collaborate with.
For sure, for sure. I want to switch it up, Jay-Z. I want people to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
What are you listening to right now? Which artist is like on repeat?
Okay, so I am addicted to this Instagram channel that's called Animals with Synthesizers, and they play nature footage with funny like EDM music in the background. So
right.
I
didn't expect that, dude. That's an answer. I thought you might hit me with something like Kendrick Lamar or something.
No. I love that. And then I have to say, like, I'm way more into like I listen to music while I work, and so it's like bonobo. It's like stuff that's like background music that puts me in the right vibe and like I can really crank, but it's not like at the front of my brain. And then when I like have an opportunity to actually like listen to something, like when I'm running as an example, it's all podcasts and audiobooks.
While you're running?
Oh my gosh.
You're listening to the First Name Basis podcast while you're running?
Yes. I mean, there are definitely an audiobook, but also podcasts that I love, that I'm excited about when it launches. And I know I won't listen to this unless I'm running, and it will get me out there on that rainy Brooklyn day to go out and take a run, to listen to that podcast, even though it's cold, it's rainy, and I don't want to get outside.
Cool. Well, you brought up Brooklyn. You got the Barclays Center right behind you. Are you guys going to get Harden?
I have no idea. It's funny, like this last year, and we can talk about that, has been so much about managing through this difficult time.
Sure.
Keeping the family going, the work going, and I've fallen off on a lot of the other things that I usually keep up with.
What do you feel? Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I miss New York so much, but like, there's this camp that keeps talking about New York is dying, and that's it. It's the death of the city. Everyone's going to move out. Taxes, lifestyle, a whole bunch of reasons. And then there's this whole other camp, and I think you're kind of still in that camp because you're still there. That's like, no, the city's just going to survive. It's resilient, and it's going to thrive still. What are some of your thoughts on like both sides of that argument?
Yeah, so I mean, I love other cities. Like I love going to LA and driving around, in the beautiful weather. Like I love.
You mean sitting around in traffic?
Yeah, sitting around in traffic. That's what it actually is. No, Santa Monica, it's not always so bad. There's a lot of like cities I go to regularly just to get to know them and try and visit there and live as if. Like I love going to Montreal and going to the market and buying a bunch of stuff from produce market and then cooking a great dinner at an Airbnb. But after I go to all of those places and then I come back here, I still love the energy of the city, the people on the street. My happiest moments are riding the subway home at 2 a.m. and a crowded subway of like people laughing from all walks of life, from all socioeconomic status. And I just, I'm wired for that, and like and feel like that basically like disappeared for about a month in March when everybody was really scared. And then all of a sudden in June and July, like the taco place around the corner from me was like, hey, maybe I can make money if I get all these quart plastic containers and start selling margaritas out of that.
Amazing.
And everybody start hanging out, socially distanced, wearing masks, but like, kind of getting reconnected with their communities. And I saw that happen in June, July, and then I just saw that ramp up, even to when the election was called. Like literally, I basically, like, before I heard anything, I heard screams.
You heard the city.
Yeah, I heard the city all at once start yelling, and my son and I grabbed like some wood spoons and some pans and walked down the street, walked up the street banging, and people were out in force, excited. And so, that's one of the things I love about the city, and I think the city will never lose that.
I was with a founder this morning, and we were chatting, and we were just talking about how much we miss New York. And there's something to be said about the hustle. Like, I come to New York City. I mean, I pretty much lived there with you guys for a bit. Yeah. But I come there, and I get this energy of just like, there's no such thing as clocking out at 5. You got to hustle. Like, you got to go 1,000,000 miles an hour right now. It's Sinatra. If you make it here, you'll make it anywhere. And you got to live by that. And then you come back and try to inject that into your organizations and in the city you are. And I think that's why I like people who visit New York often and have lived there for a bit are just wired differently.
Yeah. It's also just like built into the fabric of the city. Like, I used to spend a week a month in Seattle, and in Seattle, there was this time that I've never experienced in New York, which was the time between when you leave work and you go to dinner. And there was like a period of time where you do that. And in New York, it's just like, well, I'm not going to go back and sit in my little apartment. I'm not going to get on the subway. Like, I'm going to work up until we have dinner, and then I'm going to go meet my friends and hang out there. And then I'm going to go out to this bar, and then I'm going to go home and go to sleep. And obviously, like, I have a child now, like that pattern has changed, but it's changed in my own way where it's, okay, I'm going to, leave work, and my son and I are going to go out for a bike ride, or we're going to go to this jerk place that we really like to go to, or we're going to go and play chess at this park.
Right.
And it's a older man's version.
It's a different, but it's still that. It's still, there's always something happening. I mean, going home and watching the evening news and then going out to dinner is probably not the New York lifestyle.
Yeah. And I think that ritual is like built into the fabric of the city, and it would be hard to change.
For sure. Want to switch gears? I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, but freshly, what an amazing story. You guys just boom, boom, boom. Congrats. Just got acquired. So really good news, and really happy for you. Tell us a little bit about the experience. Pandemic obviously plays a huge role in what you guys are doing there. Talk to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy year and an exciting year. I mean, we had been very, very focused. Like, I started 3 years ago when we were a much smaller business. We had one facility where we were cooking food, and we've grown so much over those 3 years. But this last year, basically, it's been an accelerant on an already good business.
Right.
And, as I referred to earlier, when I worked in media, like, I could start to see that, the linear sort of cable TV models start to erode, but it was like this small erosion that went very, very slowly and then went quick. And I think it was the CEO of Shopify said, like, we have basically moved 10 years with e-commerce in 1 year, because
absolutely.
What a sense.
It's funny. We've had different guests on this podcast since this pandemic started, and they all are saying the same thing about each one of their industries. Financial services, same thing. We've moved 5 years in 2 months.
Yeah. And part of it was like, especially outside of big metropolitan areas, like, nobody's happy with how they get food, right? Like, what they cobble together to feed themselves over the course of the week is subpar, right? If you're a woman working in suburban Columbus, Ohio, you're going into work, and your choices during your 1 hour lunch break are fast food and fast casual. You're rushing home to make yourself dinner, and you're walking into a supermarket where all the prepared food is literally like a slice of meatloaf and some bland mashed potatoes.
Right.
And you're cobbling together something that in general doesn't taste that great, but
It's
also
not even good for you.
not good for you.
Yeah, it's
Definitely
not
not
good
good
for you. Yeah.
And if you want to be healthier, there is a huge barrier to being healthy that probably involves like meal prep. So what it involves is you on like a Sunday, which is what I used to do, get up early in the morning, cook all your meals for the week, pre-enter them into a spreadsheet, dole them out to yourself over the course of the week. And like,
only you would use the spreadsheet part.
Yeah. But like, yeah, and only I am so OCD that I can literally like do that type of thing. But like when I look at my friends and family, I'm happy that that wouldn't work for them. Like they need an easier solution. So when we saw, the pandemic hit, it was acquiring a lot of people who probably were prone and just didn't know about Freshly, but now they got to decide. It's almost like the people who moved out of New York during the pandemic, they were probably going to move. They just needed that push to figure out, like, I can't have 3 kids in a 1-bedroom. I got to figure something out.
Sure.
That was a really challenging time for us because we needed to keep the facilities going. We have, thousands of people who work every day in a facility. Luckily, because they're food facilities, it's probably the safest place for them to be because of, our sort of controls over food safety. But, we had to keep that running. We had a huge amount of demand. So much demand that literally, like, we've never thought about being in such a high demand scenario that we were essentially a grocery store with no locks on the doors. And like, we spent the first month of the pandemic literally locking things down so that we could make sure that if we were committing to send you food, we would send you food, because this is, sort of the passion.
So by locking down, you're saying like not taking on more users, or?
Part of it's not taking on more users than we can deliver on, but we just had a lot of things where we were always bringing in new people, so we didn't have to worry too much about small things. So an example I'll give you is if you skip next week's delivery and then you unskip next week's delivery, we would never check to see, like, does our supply model actually allow for that? Because pre-pandemic, those numbers were de minimis.
Yeah.
But during pandemic, if we were 1,000 orders over, we would literally have to call every one of those 1,000 orders, because what I never would want to do is not deliver on an order to an elderly person who's quarantined, who this is the food that they're getting.
They need,
somebody who's immune suppressed. So it raised, it really ignited my passion for the company and ignited, the understanding of how important food is for people. But it also really, brought into stark relief the risks of, our audience base that usually is a little more affluent, how important food is to people. And it made me think about, food instability in the United States in general, like in a rich rich country that we have, how many people, just don't have the same access to food that we do.
Oh, food banks right now. I mean, this is a passion of mine. Like, you hit the button with me, right? Like, I've been sitting on the board of, which is what's now called Feed Ontario, for the past 7 years. And the food, if you can't eat, you can't survive. Like, you can't work, you can't think, you can't do anything in your day to day. And one thing the pandemic is definitely doing is making that demand go up. I mean, we definitely, I think, as Thanksgiving rolls around and the holidays roll around, I think we should all donate pretty generously to those causes.
Yeah. I also, maybe this is a good time to give a plug for Crown Heights Mutual Aid, which is my neighborhood mutual aid organization. And it's like the perfect sort of organization for this world. Like, literally, it's a hotline that people in Crown Heights who don't know how they're going to get their next set of groceries call, say what they need. That gets published into a Slack group, and people in my neighborhood basically agree to go out and shop for that person. And I do it every Tuesday morning.
That's huge.
I look in the Slack group and I see who needs what food. I go and purchase.
I'll go do it for you, yeah.
And then the coolest thing about it is you can, pay for it yourself, or you can go back into the Slack group and say, hey, I bought this food for these people. And there's plenty of people who can't go outside and can't do this work. but then Venmo you the money to reimburse you. So it's like the perfect model of like using technology, using all these lightweight tools that we use as product managers. It's literally
Sure.
Airtable and Slack to solve real world problems. And many big cities, you know, there's a lot of segregation between the haves and have-nots. And you don't get those, what I say, opportunities to help people who are less fortunate and actually make impacts in their lives. And this was a great experience for me to be able to do that.
And see, I think it's very cool because it's very different than me just donating some cash through a website than actually me seeing someone I'm actually giving the food to and having a conversation with them, or whatever it may be, to actually see the impact you're making. Like, it's got to be a great feeling to come home and be like, I actually made a difference in someone else's life today.
Well, and also show care and show love. Like, you know, there's someone who, you know, is elderly and, you know, lives 3 flights up and their home healthcare worker isn't coming because of coronavirus. Like, I can call her or him and say, hey, I see that you want mangoes. What kind of mangoes do you love? You know,
sure.
like get them a special treat, like not just keep them fed, but show love through food and say, what would make you really happy this week that I can bring over?
Very cool.
And that's a unique opportunity.
My community here in Toronto, actually, I just saw it, is doing something very similar just on Nextdoor.
Okay.
And so they're leveraging Nextdoor, and they're like, hey, if anybody needs help, there's a bunch of able-bodied of us, or even people with some means who can help out our neighbors, and let us go out there and do that.
So really, one thing I just want to say was,
go for it.
It's really fulfilling to be able to do it, work at that level, but then also work for a company that's helping with food at such a broad level. I mean, we will ship 52 million meals this year. And so, you know, one of the big challenges we have in the United States is, you know, we have an impending health crisis. And if we can get people off of eating mac and cheese and get them to eat cauliflower mac and cheese, like, we're making a step in the people who need it the most. Like, I would also love to, you know, do a paleo line and do a keto line and do all those things for somebody who, like, on the 1 to 10 for health is like the 10 part of health, but we're really impacting like the broader population.
Awesome. What does the acquisition mean for the company? What does it bring?
You know, what's so cool about Nestle is, you know, they, one, like, recognize their value, but two, recognize how much farther we have to go. You know this, like, subscription businesses can do a lot on a very small base. But when you look at like how big our total addressable market is, I mean, people who eat in general, like Nestle understands more than anyone how big that opportunity could be. So it's sort of the best of both worlds sort of thing where we can leverage their expertise because they're so smart about manufacturing, logistics, all of these things that we could use a lot of help on. And we want to, like, not make the startup mistakes and then, you know, iterate through that. We want to get it right the first time.
They bring the scale. They bring you awesome scale and distribution right off the bat.
Yeah, but then on the flip side, you know, we're kind of like our stay together as a company, and everybody's still working together in the same way. So we're almost like, it's funny when you go through one of these experiences, you feel like everything changed, and then Monday morning it's like, get back to work. Let's keep on
still working. Yeah.
And you're like, okay, there's that press release on Friday we got acquired, but now it's time to work on Monday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Jay-Z, thank you so much for your time, man. The hour completely flew by. And like I said, you and I could do this all the time. I can't wait to come have a beer or a scotch with you in New York City as soon as it's reasonably safe to do so.
Margaritas around the corner, and I'll bring my pan and wooden spoon, and we can bang a little bit.
Let's go do it, dude. Let's go do it. Thank you so much for your time and joining us here on First Name Basis.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Bye.